This is the day my own son almost stole my entire future. And the worst part? He did it using my name, my trust, and the love I carried for him as his mother. Before I begin, I want to mention that my Revenge channel is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. I can hardly believe so many people are interested in this old lady's stories. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. I'd love to know who you are. Now, let's get back to my story. My name is Margaret Ellis, and I live in Columbus, Ohio. I am 67 years old, a widow for nearly a decade now, and until all of this happened, I thought my later years would be quiet and peaceful. I raised 3 children on my own after my husband died suddenly of a heart attack. Life was hard, but I managed to keep us afloat. I worked long hours at the library, packed lunches, sewed clothes, and made sure my children never felt the weight of the poverty we were so close to. People in my neighborhood saw me as strong, but inside, I was always afraid. Afraid of not doing enough. Afraid my children would one day resent me for the things I couldn't give them. So I poured everything I had into making sure they grew up loved, even if it meant I went without. My oldest, Catherine, became a nurse in Cincinnati. My youngest, David, moved to California and works in IT. But my middle child, Jonathan, was different. From the day he could talk, he had a way of twisting words. He could smile at you and make you believe anything. Teachers said he had charisma. Neighbors said he had leadership qualities. But I saw something darker behind those charming eyes. Still, I told myself he just needed time. Some children are late bloomers, right? Jonathan bounced between business opportunities and investment ideas, never quite settling into a job. Each time, I hoped maybe this would be the thing that set him straight. Each time, he disappointed me. And yet, whenever he came knocking, asking to borrow money, I opened the door. I told myself, he's my son. He'll pay me back. I wanted so badly to believe in him. But as the years passed, I realized Jonathan wasn't struggling like I thought. He was scheming. Every smile came with a hidden agenda. Every hug felt more like a distraction than a comfort. He had grown into a man who didn't just ask for help, he expected it, demanded it, and manipulated me into giving it. Looking back, there were warning signs. Times he exaggerated his needs. Times he downplayed the truth. But nothing prepared me for what I would eventually discover. Because one morning, as I sipped my coffee in my little kitchen, I opened an email from my banker. The subject line read, "Mrs. Ellis, please message me ASAP." And that was the moment my quiet life as a widow ended. What would you do if one of your own children betrayed you in a way you never thought possible? Would you protect them, or would you protect yourself? When I first saw the subject line on my screen, "Mrs. Ellis, please message me ASAP," my heart sank. I thought maybe it was about a missing payment, or maybe the bank had made some kind of mistake. But the tone of those words, it wasn't just business. It felt urgent, personal. I sat frozen with my mug of coffee trembling in my hand. Robert Greene, my banker, had been working with me for over 15 years. He wasn't the type to send unnecessary messages. If he was asking me to come in immediately, something was terribly wrong. At first, my mind jumped to all the usual motherly fears. Maybe Jonathan had gotten into some kind of trouble and the bank had been notified. Maybe he was in debt, or worse, maybe the police were involved. You see, when you're a mother, no matter how old your children get, you carry their mistakes on your shoulders. Every bad choice they make feels like a reflection of your own failures. so I called Robert. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, "I think it's best if you come down to the branch today. I really don't feel comfortable discussing this over the phone. But, it's about your son." That word, son, hit me harder than a hammer. Which son? What happened? Was he hurt? Did he hurt someone else? "Please," I begged him, "just tell me, is he alive?" "Yes," Robert said quickly, trying to reassure me. "He's alive. But it's serious." Those words replayed in my head as I drove to the bank that afternoon. Alive. But serious. The whole way there, I argued with myself. Maybe this wasn't Jonathan. Maybe it was David, all the way in California, and Robert had the wrong information. Or maybe Catherine. No, that couldn't be. Catherine had always been responsible. My heart kept circling back to Jonathan, though. I didn't want to believe it, but something deep inside me whispered, "It's him. It's always him." When I arrived, the bank lobby looked as it always did, neat floors, quiet voices, polite smiles. But to me, it felt like stepping into a courtroom where the verdict on my family's future was about to be read. Robert met me at his office door. His expression gave me no comfort. He wasn't smiling, not even politely. His jaw was tight, his eyes filled with something that looked almost like pity. "Mrs. Ellis," he said softly, guiding me to sit. "I know this isn't easy. But you deserve to know the truth." He pulled out a folder and set it on the desk. My hands trembled before I even touched it. Because in that moment, I knew my life was about to change. I stared at Robert, afraid to look inside. "What did my son do?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the folder himself and pushed it toward me. Papers. Statements. Signatures. My name written over and over again on documents I had never seen before. And that was the moment the bottom fell out of my world. "Tell me, if you were in my place, would you rather hear your child was in trouble with the law, or that he betrayed you to your very core?" Robert's office felt colder than it should have. The blinds were half drawn, letting in streaks of afternoon light that cut across his desk. My hand shook as I reached for the folder, though I already sensed what I would find inside. Inside were documents, pages and pages of transactions, loan agreements, and withdrawals. At first, my eyes refused to believe what they were seeing. The name printed across every sheet was mine, Margaret Ellis. My address, my social security number, my signature. Except, I had never signed any of these. "I don't understand," I whispered. My throat tightened, and the words scraped out like broken glass. Robert leaned forward, his voice steady but heavy. "Mrs. Ellis, these accounts were opened recently, all linked to your personal information. Large sums of money were moved. Loans were taken out. The total is tens of thousands of dollars." I felt dizzy, like the room was tilting. "But this isn't mine. How could my name be on this?" Robert's silence told me everything. He didn't want to say it. He wanted me to realize it myself. My heart pounded in my chest. And then, with a kind of dreadful certainty, I whispered the only name that made sense. "Jonathan." Robert finally nodded. His expression was filled with regret, almost as if he were the one who had betrayed me. "I'm afraid so. Your son has been using your identity. He opened these accounts under your name. If I hadn't caught the unusual activity, he might have gained access to your retirement savings. You could have lost everything." Everything. That word echoed in my mind. The house I worked my whole life for, the small nest egg I'd built after decades of scrimping, the security I thought would see me through my old age, all of it could have been gone in the blink of an eye. And worst of all, the person responsible was not a stranger, not a criminal from the streets. It was my own son. I stared at the papers until the words blurred. The signatures, though forged, mimicked my handwriting almost perfectly. I remembered the little boy who once sat at my kitchen table practicing my loops and curves when he was learning cursive. I had laughed then, proud of how neatly he copied me. And now, years later, those same skills had been twisted into something ugly. My own son, the words spilled out of me in a whisper. My chest ached with a pain deeper than heartbreak. It was betrayal. A wound from the inside. Robert's voice cut gently through my thoughts. You have two options. You can press charges immediately, or you can confront him and hope he stops. But in my experience, people who commit this kind of fraud rarely stop on their own. They only get bolder. I sat frozen, the paper still spread across the desk. My maternal instincts fought with cold reality. Press charges? Against my own flesh and blood? The boy I once rocked to sleep? But then another thought pierced through the guilt. Jonathan hadn't hesitated to put my entire life at risk. If he could do this once, what else was he capable of? I looked at Robert and asked the question that terrified me more than any other. Can he go to prison for this? Robert hesitated, then answered, yes. And if you don't act, the damage could be irreversible. I walked out of that bank with my world shattered. My heart told me to protect my son, but my mind knew something darker. Jonathan wasn't just borrowing. He was stealing. Not just money, but my trust, my security, my dignity. I couldn't help but wonder, if your own child did this to you, would you forgive them, or would you fight back? I drove home from the bank in silence, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight they ached. The streets of Columbus blurred past me, but I barely noticed. My mind was locked on those papers, those forged signatures, and the cruel truth behind them. Jonathan. My son. The boy I had nursed through fevers, who used to run to me with scraped knees, who once whispered that he'd take care of me when I grew old, he was the one who had done this to me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust. About the way he had looked me in the eyes so many times while asking for a little help, while knowing he was already stealing behind my back. It was about how he saw me not as his mother, but as a source, a resource, a wallet to be drained. The betrayal burned hotter than any fire. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the papers Robert had let me bring home. Each page felt like a knife wound. I couldn't stop remembering the day Jonathan was born, how small and fragile he looked in my arms. I had promised him then, silently, that I would protect him at all costs. And now here I was, trying to protect myself, from him. I thought about Catherine, my steady, responsible daughter. About David, far away in California, always the peacemaker. How would they look at their brother after this? How would they look at me if I didn't act? I could hear Robert's words in my head. People who commit this kind of fraud rarely stop on their own. The idea that Jonathan could continue, that he might drain every last cent until I had nothing left, made my chest tighten. I wasn't just angry, I was afraid. Afraid of my own child. Do you know how devastating it is for a mother to admit that? I picked up my phone and almost dialed Jonathan's number. My fingers hovered over the buttons, but I stopped. What would I even say? Son, I know you've been stealing from me. Can you please stop? He'd laugh. He'd lie. And maybe, just maybe, he'd lash out. The truth was clear, even if I didn't want to see it, Jonathan wasn't borrowing. He was betraying. He was gambling with my life savings, and he didn't care if it left me penniless. That night I barely slept. I sat awake in my living room, the documents spread across my lap, the clock ticking louder than usual on the wall. At one point, I caught myself whispering out loud, "Why, Jonathan? Why would you do this to your own mother?" But deep down, I already knew the answer. Because he believed he could get away with it. And that knowledge cut deeper than anything else. Tell me, if your child, your own flesh and blood, looked at you not as a parent but as prey, would you turn them in? Or would you let them destroy you, all in the name of love? That evening, Jonathan showed up at my house as if nothing was wrong. He strolled into the kitchen, smiling wide, and asked, "Mom, did you cook dinner?" like he always did. He hugged me quickly, his hands warm on my shoulders, and for a split second I almost believed I was imagining everything. Almost. Before I continue, I want to mention that my Revenge channel is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. I can hardly believe so many people are interested in this old lady's stories. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. I'd love to know who you are. Now, let's get back to my story. I pulled the papers from my handbag and slammed them on the table. The sound echoed through the kitchen. Jonathan froze, his smile flickering for just a second before returning. He reached for the folder casually, as if it were nothing important. "Care to explain this?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. He flipped through the pages and let out a soft chuckle. "Mom, you don't understand. This is just temporary. I was going to pay it all back once my deal came through." I felt my knees weaken, but anger held me upright. "Pay it back? You forged my signature, Jonathan. You tried to take my retirement. Do you even realize what you've done?" He leaned back in the chair, cool as a stone. "Come on, Mom. You have more than enough. Why shouldn't you help your own son?" His words sliced me open. Help. That's what he called it. I stared at him across the table and realized in that moment, Jonathan didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as a bank account with a heartbeat. I remembered all the nights I stayed awake as a young widow, wondering how I would feed 3 children. How I stitched holes in their clothes so they wouldn't feel poor at school. How I skipped meals just so they could have seconds. And now, the son I sacrificed so much for sat in front of me, shrugging off fraud like it was no more serious than forgetting to mow the lawn. "Jonathan," I said, my voice trembling, "I gave you everything I could. And this is how you repay me?" For just a second, I saw the mask slip. His eyes hardened, his jaw clenched. Then, just as quickly, the charming smile returned. "Don't make a big deal out of this, Mom. Families stick together. Besides, no one's going to believe you over me." The words hit me like ice water. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't scared. He was confident he could get away with it. And that was the moment I realized, I wasn't just fighting for my savings. I was fighting for my dignity. Tell me, if your own child sat across from you, smiling while stealing your future, would you forgive them, or finally stand up and fight back? The night after I confronted Jonathan, I sat in my living room staring at the papers again, my hands shaking with anger and grief. I knew I couldn't carry this burden alone, so I picked up the phone and called Catherine. My daughter has always been the strong one, the kind of woman who stands on her own 2 feet and doesn't let anyone push her around. When she arrived the next morning, I spread the documents across the coffee table. She looked through them silently, her face hardening with every page. Finally, she set them down and looked me straight in the eyes. "Mom," she said firmly, "you have to report this. Jonathan isn't just asking for help, he's stealing from you. If you don't stop him now, he's going to ruin you." Her words cut me, but they also rang true. Catherine had seen through her brother for years, though I hadn't wanted to admit it. But just as I was beginning to gather my courage, David called from California. His voice was filled with panic when I told him what Jonathan had done. "Mom, please don't go to the police," he begged. "He's still our brother. He made mistakes, but if you put him in jail, it'll destroy this family." I closed my eyes, torn between their voices. Catherine demanding justice, David pleading for mercy. And me, caught in the middle, with my heart split in two. That evening, all three of us ended up at my house. Catherine stood tall, arms crossed, her anger radiating across the room. David sat slouched on the sofa, rubbing his forehead like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. Jonathan leaned against the wall, smirking as if this was just another game he could win. Catherine pointed at him. "You've gone too far, Jonathan. This isn't borrowing money. This is fraud. You tried to steal from your own mother." Jonathan shrugged. "Families are supposed to take care of each other. I just did what I had to do." David jumped in, his voice cracking. "Stop it, both of you. Mom, please, don't press charges. We can figure this out as a family. Maybe Jonathan can pay it back somehow." I looked between them, Catherine with her fiery eyes, David with his pleading ones, and Jonathan with that cold, careless grin. And in that moment, I realized I was the only one who truly understood the danger. Because Jonathan wasn't going to pay anything back. He wasn't going to stop. He was going to keep going until I had nothing left, not money, not dignity, not even a roof over my head. The weight of that truth nearly crushed me. Tell me, if you were standing in my shoes, hearing one child beg for justice and another beg for mercy, which voice would you listen to? I had hoped, after seeing the disgust in Catherine's eyes and hearing the panic in David's voice, that Jonathan might feel some shame. That maybe, just maybe, he would realize how far he had gone and pull back. But instead, what happened next showed me the truth. Jonathan had no intention of stopping. Within a week, I noticed strange envelopes arriving at my house, letters from lenders I had never contacted. When I opened one, my stomach dropped. It was a late notice for a loan I had taken out, in my name, with my forged signature at the bottom. I tore open the others and found the same thing. It wasn't just a mistake. Jonathan was still forging, still digging deeper. I confronted him again, this time over the phone. My voice shook with anger. "Jonathan, I told you to stop. These notices are still coming. You're burying me in debt I never agreed to." He laughed, a laugh so cold it made my blood run cold. "Relax, Mom. I've got it handled. You worry too much." Handled? What he really meant was that he was handling me like a fool. And it didn't stop there. A neighbor came by one afternoon with a worried look on her face. She leaned close and whispered, "Margaret, are you all right? I heard Jonathan say you've been forgetting things, that you might not be able to manage your finances anymore." My cheeks burned with shame. My son wasn't just stealing from me, he was spreading lies to discredit me, so if I ever spoke out, no one would believe me. He was painting me as a senile old woman, losing her grip on reality. That night, I walked into my bedroom and found drawers rifled through, papers scattered across the floor. My home office had been broken into, by my own son. When I caught him in the act, he looked up at me with no fear in his eyes. Instead, he sneered. "What are you going to do, Mom?" Call the cops on your own son? His words stung because that's exactly what he knew I couldn't bring myself to do. At least, not yet. He shoved past me, brushing my shoulder with a force that felt more like a warning than an accident. That was the night my fear turned into resolve. I realized Jonathan didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as prey, an obstacle to tear down, a possession to claim. And if I didn't do something soon, I would lose everything. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the blinds drawn, papers spread in front of me, and my heart pounding in my chest. I whispered to myself, this is no longer about love. This is survival. I knew then that the son I raised was gone. In his place was a man consumed by greed, arrogance, and a belief that he could never be stopped. But he was wrong. Because for the first time in years, I felt something rise in me that he wasn't expecting, anger strong enough to fight back. So tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you still protect your child, or would you finally protect yourself? After that night when Jonathan shoved past me in my own home, I knew the line had been crossed. He wasn't just taking advantage of me, he was trying to strip me of everything I had left. My son had become my enemy. The fear inside me began to harden into something else. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the pile of fraudulent papers, and whispered out loud, no more. I'm not going to let you destroy me. The next morning, I called Robert, my banker, and asked to meet him again. He must have heard the steel in my voice, because he didn't hesitate. When I arrived at his office, he closed the door and leaned in. Mrs. Ellis, he said, I'm glad you came. I was worried you'd let this slide. I shook my head. I'm done letting it slide. I want to stop him. But I need to do it the right way. That's when Robert introduced me to Angela Simmons, a lawyer who specialized in financial crimes. Angela was sharp, confident, and had the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter without realizing it. After I laid everything out, she nodded slowly. You're right to act now, she said. Jonathan thinks he's clever, but arrogance is a criminal's biggest weakness. If we bait him carefully, we can catch him red-handed, and there won't be a shred of doubt left in court. Her words lit a spark inside me. For the first time in months, I felt hope. So we began to plan. Robert created a small test account in my name, one that Jonathan could easily discover if he was snooping. Angela drafted the paperwork to make sure every move was tracked, logged, and admissible as evidence. We even set up a fake opportunity, a supposed investment fund tied to my retirement, with just enough money inside to tempt him. It felt like setting a trap for a wild animal that had been circling my house too long. Dangerous, but necessary. Meanwhile, I played my part at home. I acted as though nothing had changed. I smiled at Jonathan when he dropped by. I let him think I was still weak, still confused, still clinging to my old motherly guilt. Inside, though, I was sharper than I had ever been. Every word I spoke was measured. Every step I took was calculated. One evening, over dinner, I let it slip that I had been thinking about rearranging my will. Jonathan's eyes flickered, and I saw the hunger spark. He tried to hide it, but I knew him too well. Really, Mom? He asked, his tone light but his voice too eager. Well, you should make sure it's done right. I mean, you wouldn't want anyone to take advantage of you. I looked at him across the table and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't smiling as a mother. I was smiling as someone who finally understood her enemy. He thought I was bluffing. He thought he was still in control. But what Jonathan didn't know was that every step he took now was leading him straight into the trap we had built. Tell me, if you were in my position, would you still hesitate to catch your own child in the act? Or would you let him finally taste the consequences of his own greed? The plan was set, but Jonathan was moving faster than I expected. He had been sniffing around, asking subtle questions about my finances, showing up at my house unannounced, and even hinting to neighbors that I wasn't managing well on my own. I could feel him circling me, like a predator testing the fence for weak spots. One night, I woke up to the faint sound of drawers opening in my office. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe my imagination. But when I stepped into the hallway, the creak of the floor under another's weight told me I wasn't alone. My heart raced. I flipped on the light, and there he was. Jonathan, crouched over my desk, rifling through papers with no shame in his eyes. "Jonathan!" I gasped. He straightened up slowly, a smirk spreading across his face. "Relax, Mom. I was just checking something for you." "For me?" I snapped, my voice trembling with fury. "You're breaking into my office in the middle of the night and forging my life away. How dare you?" He stepped closer, his smirk fading into something colder. "Don't talk to me like that. I'm your son. I'm entitled to what you have." The words hit me like a slap. My son, entitled to my life's work? My sacrifices? I pointed at the door, my hands shaking. "Get out. Right now." That's when it happened. He moved toward me, fast, and shoved me against the wall. The force wasn't enough to knock me down, but it was enough to send a clear message: he wasn't afraid to hurt me. For a moment, time froze. The boy I once held in my arms, the teenager I stayed up late worrying about, the man I prayed would find his way, he was gone. In his place was someone who looked at me not with love, but with cold calculation. I pushed back and shouted, "You've crossed the line, Jonathan." He sneered, leaning in close. "What are you going to do, Mom? Call the cops on your own flesh and blood?" His words dripped with arrogance, but underneath I saw fear. He thought he could scare me into silence. He thought my love would keep me from fighting back. But what he didn't understand was that his shove didn't break me, it woke me up. As he stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled, I stood in the hallway with my hands trembling, not from fear but from clarity. That was the moment I knew I had no choice left. My son wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to change. And if I didn't act now, I wasn't just risking my money, I was risking my safety, my home, and maybe even my life. So tell me, if your own child laid hands on you, would you still forgive them? Or would you finally choose to protect yourself, no matter the cost? After that night, when Jonathan shoved me in my own hallway, something inside me shifted for good. I had spent years covering for him, excusing him, hoping he would change. But now I saw him clearly. He wasn't a troubled son who needed help, he was a dangerous man who would take everything from me if I let him. The next morning, I gathered the folder of fraudulent papers, the late loan notices, and the copies of fake accounts Robert had set up. My hands shook as I placed everything in a neat pile. It felt like I was gathering the pieces of my broken heart. Then I dialed the number I never thought I would call on my own child, the police. When the officer arrived, I opened the door with tears in my eyes. He was kind but professional, listening quietly as I explained. I showed him the evidence, page after page of Jonathan's fraud, and finally whispered the words I never imagined would leave my lips. "I want to press charges against my son." The officer didn't flinch. He just nodded, took notes, and assured me they would investigate. "You've done the right thing, ma'am," he said. But his words didn't feel like comfort. They felt like a weight pressing harder on my chest. That afternoon, I met again with Angela, my lawyer. She smiled grimly when I told her. Good, she said. Now we let him trap himself. The police will be watching, and with Robert's setup, he won't be able to deny a thing. And sure enough, it didn't take long. Jonathan, arrogant as ever, took the bait. He tried to move money from one of the accounts Robert had flagged, confident no one would notice. But this time everything was logged, timestamped, and backed up with evidence. The day the police came for him, I stood at the window, clutching the curtain with trembling fingers. 2 officers led him out in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage. He saw me standing there and shouted, "You traitor! How could you do this to your own son?" The words cut deep, but I didn't move. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch under his anger. I simply stared back at him, my face like stone. Because the truth was simple, I hadn't done this to him. He had done it to himself. As the patrol car drove away, I sank into my chair, exhausted and broken-hearted. The house felt too quiet, the air heavy with grief. But underneath the sorrow was something new, a sense of power, of finally standing up for myself. I had protected Jonathan all his life. Now, for the first time, I had chosen to protect myself. Tell me, if you were forced to choose between saving your child from consequences or saving yourself from destruction, which path would you take? The weeks that followed Jonathan's arrest were some of the hardest of my life. People whispered about me in the grocery store, neighbors stopped waving, and even at church I could feel the stares. Some thought I was cruel for pressing charges. Others pitied me. But no one understood what it was like to live in my shoes, carrying the shame of a son who tried to strip me of everything I had worked for. When the trial began, I walked into the courthouse with Catherine at my side. She held my hand tight, her strength flowing into me. Across the room sat Jonathan, dressed in a suit he probably borrowed, flashing the same charming smile he had used his whole life to get out of trouble. For a moment, I almost saw the little boy he used to be. But then he looked at me with eyes so cold they sent a shiver down my spine. His lawyer stood and painted him as a devoted son. Jonathan Ellis was only trying to help his aging mother manage her complicated finances, he argued. She misunderstood, and now she's unfairly accusing her own child. I felt my face burn. Misunderstood? No, I hadn't misunderstood. I had been betrayed. When it was my turn, I sat in the witness chair, my hands folded in my lap. My voice trembled at first as I spoke. I told the court about the emails, the forged loans, the rumors he spread about me being senile. I spoke of the night he shoved me in my own hallway, the fear in my chest when I realized my own son could hurt me. Jonathan's lawyer tried to twist my words, asking if I might have imagined the signatures, or if stress had made me forget agreeing to certain loans. I looked him straight in the eye and said firmly, I may be old, but I am not senile. I know what I signed, and I know what I didn't. My son stole from me. Then Robert, my banker, took the stand. He explained the suspicious accounts, the flagged transactions, and the traps Jonathan fell right into. Every detail was backed up with records. Angela, my lawyer, cross-examined Jonathan's defense so thoroughly they could hardly breathe between objections. Finally, Jonathan himself was called to testify. He smiled at the jury, spoke in smooth tones, and tried to play the role of the misunderstood son. I was only borrowing, he insisted. I never meant to hurt my mother. She's confused about how finances work. But then Angela rose, holding up a stack of papers. Is this your signature, Mr. Ellis? She asked, showing the forged documents. Jonathan hesitated, his smile faltering. And is this not a recording of you attempting to transfer money from your mother's account? She pressed, as the jury listened to his own voice caught on tape. His charm cracked. His answers grew shaky, his excuses thinner. By the time Angela was done, Jonathan looked less like a misunderstood son and more like exactly what he was, a manipulative thief. I watched the jurors' faces shift from sympathy to disgust. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years when it came to Jonathan: relief. As the session ended for the day, I sat quietly, my heart pounding. This wasn't over yet, but I could see the tide turning. Tell me, if your own child stood in court and tried to convince the world you were a liar, could you find the strength to stand tall and tell the truth? The final day of the trial arrived with heavy gray clouds hanging low over Columbus. As Catherine and I walked into the courthouse, I felt like the weather itself carried the weight of what was about to happen. My stomach twisted in knots, and though I tried to steady my breathing, I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. Jonathan sat at the defense table, his usual smirk replaced by something sharper, nervous anger. He avoided my eyes, tapping his fingers against the wood as though he still believed he could talk his way out of this. For a moment, I wondered if he truly understood that this time, his charm wouldn't save him. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. I clenched Catherine's hand as the foreman stood. The silence in that room was so thick you could hear the air conditioning hum. On the charge of fraud, the foreman read, "We find the defendant guilty." On the charge of identity theft, guilty. On the charge of attempted theft of property, guilty. Each word felt like both a hammer and a release. Guilty. 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 Jonathan's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't look at me. His jaw worked furiously, grinding against the weight of the verdict. The judge spoke next, his tone stern and deliberate. "Jonathan Ellis, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison, with no possibility of early release until the minimum term is served." The gavel came down, sharp and final. My breath caught in my throat. 5 years. My son, my flesh and blood, was going to prison. Jonathan whipped around then, his eyes finally locking on mine. And what I saw there wasn't regret. It wasn't sadness. It was hatred. "You did this to me," he spat, as officers moved to restrain him. "You're no mother, you're a traitor." The words pierced my chest, but I forced myself not to flinch. Because in that moment, I realized something powerful: I hadn't betrayed him. He had betrayed me. All I had done was refuse to let him destroy me. As they led him away in handcuffs, Jonathan's shouts echoing down the corridor, I sat silently on the wooden bench. My tears came then, not just from grief but from release. The long nightmare I had been living was finally over. Catherine wrapped her arm around me, whispering, "You did the right thing, Mom." And yet, the truth was complicated. My heart was torn in two, half aching for the boy I once knew, the little boy who used to curl up beside me after thunderstorms, and half relieved that the man he had become could no longer hurt me. It was a strange kind of victory, one laced with sorrow. I had won back my dignity, my safety, and my future. But I had lost my son to his own choices. Tell me, if justice meant losing the child you once loved, would you still take that step? Or would you let him walk free, even if it meant sacrificing yourself? After the sentencing, I thought I would finally breathe freely. But freedom didn't come right away. Instead, I found myself living under a different kind of shadow, the whispers of my community. At the grocery store, I could feel the stares before I even reached the produce aisle. Women leaned close to one another, their voices low but sharp enough for me to hear pieces. "That's her, she's the one who sent her son to prison." At church, I caught the sideways glances, the way conversation stopped when I walked by. Some didn't say anything, but their silence spoke volumes. Others weren't so subtle. One woman I had known for years shook her head and muttered, "I could never do that to my child." Their judgment stung. They didn't know what it was like to sit across from your own son as he stole your future piece by piece. They didn't see the nights I stayed awake wondering if he would hurt me again. They didn't hear the cruel way he said, "I'm entitled to what you have." But for every whisper of judgment, there were quieter, softer words that reached me in unexpected places. One afternoon, a grandmother from my neighborhood knocked on my door. Her eyes were wet with tears as she said, "Margaret, I want you to know you're not alone. My own son nearly ruined me too. I didn't have the courage to stop him, and I lost everything. You were brave in a way I never was." Her words cut through the shame I had been carrying. For the first time, I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was the story of countless mothers and grandmothers who had been manipulated by the very children they loved most. More women came to me quietly, at the bank, in the pharmacy, even in the parking lot after Sunday service. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't want their secrets known. But in hushed voices they said the same thing, "You did the right thing. I wish I had your strength." It was then I understood something important. People will always judge what they don't understand. To some, I was the cold-hearted mother who betrayed her son. But to others, I was a voice they wished they had. And maybe that was the real lesson. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone in public while quietly holding up others who can't speak for themselves. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you listen to the judgment of strangers, or the quiet gratitude of those who truly understand your pain? Once the noise of the trial settled and Jonathan was behind bars, I finally turned to the part of my life I had almost lost, my future. For weeks, I sat at my kitchen table with Angela, my lawyer, and Robert, my banker. We combed through every account, every document, every place Jonathan had left his fingerprints. Angela made sure every fraudulent loan was disputed and closed. Robert reorganized my accounts so that nothing could ever be touched without multiple layers of security. Piece by piece, I felt myself taking back control. And with every form I signed, every line we corrected, I felt less like a victim and more like a woman standing tall again. But there was one final step I knew I had to take, rewriting my will. I met Angela in her office, a quiet space with shelves lined with legal books. When she slid the fresh papers across the desk, my hand hovered over the pen. It was harder than I expected. Cutting my own son out of my inheritance felt like erasing him from my life completely. But then I remembered the night he shoved me against the wall, the smirk on his face when he said, "I'm entitled to what you have." I remembered the forged signatures, the lies to neighbors, the nights I couldn't sleep because of the fear he created in my own home. And in that moment, the hesitation vanished. I signed the papers, removing Jonathan from my will permanently. Instead, I redirected everything, my home, my savings, even the little jewelry box I had guarded since my wedding day, to Catherine and her children. I also set aside something for David, though smaller, with the promise that he would never have to carry Jonathan's debts. When it was done, Angela looked at me with a small smile. "You've just ensured that your son's greed won't touch your family ever again." That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly. Weeks later, I invited Catherine and her children over for dinner. I watched them laugh around my table, their plates filled, their eyes bright. I thought about how the money I'd worked so hard for could help Catherine's kids go to college, buy a home, or chase dreams I never could. For the first time, I felt peace, not because I was rich, but because I knew my legacy was safe. Jonathan had gambled my love for money, but in the end, it was Catherine and the grandchildren who would inherit not only what I built, but the strength I fought so hard to reclaim. I sometimes wonder if Jonathan knows. If, in his prison cell, he thinks about the fact that when he walks out one day, he will have nothing waiting for him. No inheritance. No home. No savings. Nothing. That was my final revenge, not revenge out of cruelty, but out of justice. He took my love and turned it into a weapon against me. So I took his greed and turned it into his downfall. Tell me, if you were given the choice, would you leave your fortune to the child who betrayed you, or cut them out completely, even if it broke your heart? When all was said and done, and the storm had finally passed, I found myself sitting alone in my quiet living room. The house that once echoed with Jonathan's footsteps now felt calmer, steadier, almost sacred. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of who might come knocking at my door or rummaging through my drawers. But the silence came with a cost. My son, my own flesh and blood, was gone, locked away by his own choices. And though I had fought hard to protect myself, a piece of me would always ache for the little boy I once knew, the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap after bedtime stories. That boy was gone, and in his place had grown a man who chose greed over love. The lesson wasn't easy to swallow, but it was clear: sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. And love, as powerful as it is, should never blind you to betrayal. I used to believe being a mother meant sacrificing everything, even my dignity, to protect my children. But now I know the truth. Being a mother also means teaching lessons, even the hardest ones. And sometimes, the lesson isn't for them, it's for us. I didn't press charges because I stopped loving Jonathan. I pressed charges because I finally started loving myself. It's strange, isn't it? How standing up for yourself can feel like the most painful act of love and the most powerful act of survival at the same time. So if you're listening to my story and carrying your own silent pain, I want you to hear this: you are stronger than you think. You are worth protecting. And no one, not even family, has the right to take your dignity from you. Jonathan thought he could strip me of everything I owned, but in the end, he lost everything instead: his freedom, his inheritance, and the last of my trust. And I gained something far more precious than money. I gained myself back. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated, betrayed, or pushed aside by the very people you trusted most? What would you have done if you were in my place?